Hello everyone, and welcome back to Lost Planeswalker. You're here with me, Jesse, the Lost Planeswalker, and today I'm doing the Explorers of the Deep Precon Upgrade Guide. And this is the final video in this series, so if you haven't seen the other ones, please go check them out. But this one is all about the Merfolk deck, and I'm actually quite interested in this deck because I've seen it being played, I've looked through the card list, and I love it. I think that this is actually very, very powerful and something that I would consider picking up myself. But enough about that. Let's talk about this deck and who is the face commander of this deck. It's Hawkball of the Surging Soul, 2 green-blue legendary creature Merfolk Scout. At the beginning of combat on your turn, each Merfolk creature you control explores. So explore basically means you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you can put it into your hand. Otherwise, put a +1/+1 counter on the exploring creature, and you can either put that card back on top or into your graveyard. So Explore is actually a pretty powerful mechanic that we got a lot more support for in this set. And also, whenever Hawkball of Surging Soul attacks, you may put a land from your hand onto the battlefield, and if you don't, you can draw a card. Hawkball is actually a powerhouse. For 4 mana, he can grow himself, he can grow your entire board, and you can either use him to ramp or draw cards. That's actually sick. Hawkball is a awesome commander, and is definitely going to be the way that we build around this deck. But a lot of the cards I decided to cut from this deck are cut because I think that they're good, but they don't quite work. You know, out of all of these decks, I think this was the second hardest deck to cut. There was a lot of cards I knew I wanted to put in, but I just couldn't figure out what would be good to take out. So starting off, a new card, we have Bygone Marvels, which is a green sorcery, Descend 8. So in order to activate this Descend 8 ability, you have to have 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. And what this does is, in this case, is it's going to copy this spell twice, and you may choose a new target for the copies. But this spell for a green says return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, exile Bygone Marvel. I think this is good, but it doesn't really do a lot. And from the gameplay I've seen, Descending 8 in this deck, unless you're milling a bunch of stuff, is actually not as easy as it seems, because your board gets so big so quick that you're kind of going to win the game very quickly unless somebody can start answering you, and you end up having a lot of stuff on your board regardless. So I'm not sure Bygone Marvels is the best card for this deck. I think that there's just so much card draw, it's unnecessary as well. Which kind of brings me to the next card, which we have Commit Memory, which is a 2-part card. For 3 and a blue, we have an instant, put target spell or non-land permanent into its owner's library second from the top. And then Memory is 4 blue with Aftermath, meaning you have to cast this while it's in your graveyard. But each player shuffles their hand and their graveyard into their library and draws 7. So you can basically put a big threat or combo piece back into your opponent's deck and then shuffle it up. But for how much mana you're paying into this, I really don't think it's worth it. There's so many other great things, and I think it's not worth getting into. But next up, we have Coral Helm Commander, which is blue creature Merfolk Soldier with Level Up, which Level Up is actually a cool ability, and I wish they would bring it back, maybe in a new Zendikar set in the future. But how it works is you have to pay more mana into this, and when you level it up, it gets additional abilities. So it starts out as a 2/2, then when it's at level 2 to 3, it gets flying and it's a 3/3, and then at level 4+, other Merfolk creatures you control get +1/+1, and it turns into a 4/4. So it turns into a Lord, but you have to pay 6 additional mana to get a 4/4 Lord with flying, which honestly isn't that bad. But the fact that, like, there's so many other Lords that are just cheaper, you could cast 2 Lords for the price of this 1 Lord, and buffing up your whole board is way more powerful than this 1 Merfolk. So I just think it needs cut. I don't think it's that great. So these next 2 cards I'm going to talk about are cut because I think your commander kind of solves that issue, and I don't think it's really that powerful. But we have Explore and Growth Spiral. So Explore is a 1 green sorcery. You may play an additional land this turn and draw a card. Super great ramp card in a lot of decks, but because our commander explores so much, we're going to be putting a ton of land into our hand, and the fact that we can play an additional land is okay, but our commander also says, play an additional land, or draw a card. So I don't think that these spells are going to be as good as you want them to be. They're going to be good to getting land out of your hand, but I think I'd like to draw into other things that aren't these spells. You know, if I draw into this, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to cast this to hopefully get something else, is not really where I want to be. Growth Spiral is the exact same way. You draw a card, and you may play a land from your hand onto the battlefield. You know, it's a Simic this time instead of 1 and a green, so it's actually probably worse because Explore just goes in more decks. But same, you know, grievances I have on the last card. But a card I decided to remove, and this is a land, and I'm not sure how everybody's going to feel about this, but it's Karn's Bastion. It's a land that says tap to add a colorless or 4 and proliferate. I can see an argument where you have a ton of mana so you're going to want to proliferate. But proliferating one every turn is really not as good as you can get. There's so many other cards that just do so much more work than this, and I just don't think it's worthwhile including it. So I would remove this if I were you. Next up, we have Merfolk Skydiver, green and a blue. Creature, Merfolk Mutant. It is flying, and when Merfolk Skydiver enters battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Okay, that's kind of cool, but at the same time, its second ability is 3 green blue proliferate. I just don't think it's worthwhile. I think your commander already buffs up your creatures so much, and you have so many other lords, the proliferate really doesn't matter that much. And there's arguments for, no, this is actually really good because of, Simic Ascendancy or whatever, but you're going to be putting so many +1/+1 counters, especially the cards I included, put so many +1/+1 counters, I just don't think it's worthwhile. And next, we have Sage of Fables, 2 and a blue creature Merfolk Wizard. Each other wizard creature you control enters battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, that's pretty cool. 2, remove a +1/+1 counter from a creature you control, draw a card. So one ability is pay 2 mana to draw a card, which is okay in certain situations, but not really great in this deck. And the other one is Wizards. There's not that many Wizards in this deck. There's a certain amount, because you have some cards, I guess, from Ravnica and whatever, but to bet on drawing into a Wizard to get a +1/+1, I just don't think it's the right call. There's so many other cards that just buff everything regardless. I don't think that this is worthwhile including. And the last card I'm cutting, and unfortunately it's one of my favorite cards, but Thassa, God of the Sea. I just don't see this being as powerful as you want it to be. 2 and a blue legendary enchantment creature god with indestructible. As long as your devotion to blue is less than 5, Thassa isn't a creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1 and a blue, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. So I can see an argument where you're going to include this because you want to swing in and you want to be unblockable. Okay, but your creatures are going to be so big that you really don't care about them being unblockable at a certain point. You're kind of happier destroying your opponent's board and making it so you can just swing in and kill them than this unblockable, I think, in some cases. And I really would love if Thassa was a merfolk, but she's not. She's a god. So she's not going to grow and get bigger and be this, huge indestructible threat that you want her to be. But I could see, arguing keeping her in because of the unblockable clause. But that kind of, rounds up the cards I decided to cut, and I'm going to get into the new cards I wanted to put in. But first off, I just wanted to say, if you aren't subscribed to my channel, please consider doing so. This is the 4th and final video, meaning that if you want to check out any of the other Precon upgrade guides I did, those are on my channel already. And this was a super fun process, and, please leave comments, leave likes, subscribe, because if I see that, I'll be more dedicated to do more of these in the future. And, whether or not you agree with what I decided, I'm getting better at these the more I look at them, and I just really appreciate all of the support everybody is giving me on all my other content. And if I get the same amount of support on this, I'll continue to do more of these as new decks come out. So thank you so much. But let's dive into those new cards. And starting out, we have Avenger of Zendikar. And this is kind of an oddball one, and I'll give you that. But I have a couple of reasons why I think this is really good. First off, Hawkball lets you play additional lands every turn. So you can create a giant board of 1/1s and then buff them up multiple times each turn. In addition to that, there is some other proliferate stuff in the deck that I left in because I liked it, and you're going to be able to make these even bigger. So I think Avenger of Zendikar is a great card because while you're not buffing it up with your commander, you are still creating an even, a giant sideboard of these plant creatures that are just going to grow every turn as well, because you're definitely going to be getting lands into your hand where you can just continually play these. And if you want to go into, that more landfall effect, you can definitely benefit from, doing that again and again, or putting in some other cards like Azusa, Lost but Seeking, to play, all of those lanes every turn to just get as much value as possible. But next up, I want to talk about Champion of Lambholt. 1 green creature, human warrior. Creatures with power less than Champion of Lambholt's power can't block creatures you control. So as you see, this is the second creature that isn't merfolk. And I think honestly there's enough merfolk in this deck where you don't have to worry about, the ones that I removed. I only removed 3, by the way. There's like 36 creatures or whatever in this deck. It's very creature heavy. So the few creatures I'm adding, I think, are actually going to be super powerful. But Champion of Lambholt reads, creature, human warrior. Creatures with power less than Champion of Lambholt's power can't block creatures you control. Okay. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of Lambholt. So in addition to this getting bigger and bigger, this just gives your whole board unblockable. Okay. So this is when I was saying, cut Thassa. This is why you cut Thassa, because this just turns your entire board into an unblockable threat for free, basically, and it just gets bigger the more you play. So I think that this is definitely worth the include. My next card is Kami of Whispered Hope. Hopes, 2 and a green creature spirit. If one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a permanent you control, that many +1 counters are put on that permanent instead. Tap, add X mana of any one color, where X is Comedy Hope's power. So most likely you're only going to ever tap this for 1 because you're really not putting +1/+1 counters on other things. But just the fact that whenever you explore, you just double up the number of +1/+1s. Yep, that seems fantastic. Or I guess you add an additional one, but if you were just adding 1, now you're adding 2. So this is very good. And very similarly, we have the Ozolith, the Shattered Spire, for 1 and a green legendary artifact. If one or more +1/+1 counters will be put on an artifact or creature you control, that many +1 are put on it instead. And for 1 and a green, tap, put a +1/+1 counter on target artifact or creature you control, activate only as a sorcery, or cycle for 2. So again, now if you have Comedy of the Whispered Hopes and Ozolith, the Shattered Spire out, you're putting 3 +1/+1 counters on a creature every time you explore, making your board just incredibly, just threat. So the next card I included, I think you could really argue putting it in any deck that can play blue, because why not, is Spark Double. 3 and a blue, creature illusion. You may have Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker you control, except it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature, it enters with an additional loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker, and it isn't legendary, meaning we can copy our commander, so twice every turn we can explore, getting double the explore triggers, double all the +1/+1 triggers, just anything and everything. It's just so good. And Spark Double is definitely there for you. I think that you could put this on any number of cards in your deck. There's a card that says if you explore an additional time, so now you're exploring 3 times a turn. We could do an additional one on the co-commander, so we're putting more lands out and it's just getting bigger and bigger. There's so many good targets for this in this deck that I think Spark Double is a definite include. So my next card is probably the most expensive card I've put in any of these Precon upgrade guides, and this is one I don't expect everybody to play, but if you have it, that's great. If you don't, it's a really good card, so if you can afford it or save up for it, maybe get it. It's the Great Henge. So it's a 7 mana green legendary artifact. With this spell, costs X list cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Very easily, this is just going to cost 2 green in this deck. You can tap to add 2 green. You can gain 2 life, and whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. Card draw, +1/+1s, gaining life, making more mana, and it only costing 2 mana means the turn you play it, you can basically get a full refund for it and potentially, draw some cards off of it. The Great Henge is one of the best cards. It's just going to make this deck even better, so I would consider including it. The next card I would consider including is Tribute to the World Tree, another card from March of the Machine. We got a lot of really good +1/+1 counter cards in March of the Machine, and Tribute to the World Tree is, no exception. It is green enchantment. Whenever a creature enters a battlefield under your control, draw a card if its power is 3 or greater. Otherwise, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So a lot of our merfolk that maybe start out small, we get to instantly buff, or we just get to draw a bunch of cards off this. So I really like this effect. I think that this is definitely going to propel, all of your board to be even bigger and just help you get there. So I really love this card. It's definitely one of the best ones. It's very threatening if you see it on the board, so be aware of that. Down to the last 2, and our first of 2 cards we have here is Vigor, one of my favorite cards. It is an elemental incarnation for 3 green. It has trample, and if damage would be dealt to another creature you control, prevent that damage and put a +1/+1 counter on that creature for each 1 damage prevented that way. Then when Vigor is put into a graveyard from anywhere, we shuffle it into our library. So basically our board can't die. None of our creatures can die. The damage is just prevented, and all of that is just stacked back on top of it, meaning that our 2/2 creature now becomes a 4/4 creature, and that 4/4 next turn, if it's all that damage is blocked, becomes an 8/8. All of our stuff just keeps on growing, and it's just such a cool card because the only way to truly get rid of it is to exile it. And while there's a lot of effects, your opponents might not have that right on hand. So there's that option as well. But the last card I decided to include in this deck is Wizard class for a single blue mana. First level, you have no max hand size. 2 and a blue at level 2. Whenever this class becomes level 2, draw 2 cards. And 4 and a blue level 3. Whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature you control. All things we want to do: drawing cards, putting +1/+1s, just more benefits for drawing cards, which I think technically we put the land into our hand, so we're not drawing it, but we're going to be drawing from a lot of other things, so I think it's definitely worth the include. And that's it. What do you think of this, Precon upgrade? Is this good? Did I make good cuts? Are these cards you would have added? Are there other cards you would have cut or added? please leave it down in the comments down below. I would love to see what you think. You know, maybe I took out a card or I added a card and you're like, I never thought about that, or that's a terrible card. You know, tell me about it. I'd love to hear more about it. And, you know, if you aren't subscribed, you know, thank you. This is my second, like, I guess, mini series, because I just did a bunch of commander decks and now I'm doing all of these in a row. So if you guys like content like this, maybe I'll start aiming at this. But if you liked my content beforehand, where, you know, I kind of did different videos during different times of the week, let me know as well. Because if you guys are like, well, I wish you still did that, I'll go back to that. You know, I can do that. It's just how I've been preparing lately, just trying to figure out a new workflow, and I would really appreciate some feedback, you know. And if you would consider sharing this with a friend or leaving a like, that would just help me out even more. So thank you. So today's Scryfall card of the day is Sovereigner Leviathan. Leviathan 2, can you catch him with a fishing hook or run a line around his tongue? Job 4025. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you later, Planeswalkers.